The government has announced that teachers are no longer required to isolate for 7 days if they are a close contact. They do, of course, have to produce a negative rapid antigen test and show no symptoms. Will this help alleviate some of the pressure put on teachers and schools?
Well, I think there are still some very serious concerns about the health risks for teachers. And perhaps even if we have that policy in place, teachers who actually feel unwell with COVID are likely to have absences, perhaps extended absences, and those things are going to put pressure on the teachers remaining in the schools. Now, the real fear here is that even pre-pandemic, there were teacher shortages. We saw a whole 3,000 teacher places vacant in New South Wales towards the end of last year. How are we going to provide teachers for all of those classrooms? And what is the plan for when those shortages hit a crisis point?
You mentioned a little while earlier some of the techniques that internationally are being used around schools. What are some of those techniques which may be adapted in Australia? Will we potentially see merged classrooms, or will we just go back to at-home learning?
Yes, the merged classrooms, they've been doing that in England as a policy. However, that tends to exacerbate the health concerns for both the students and the teachers, of course. So I think it'll be about what sort of suite of mitigation policy is brought in. There is to be an announcement, I understand, tomorrow from National Cabinet. And I think it'll be about a coordination of multiple measures within schools. I think that addressing the shortages, should they appear, is really only going to lead to those options we've mentioned. One, we can try and recruit some additional casual teachers, students, etc., or indeed parents, or we can have return to remote teaching in some areas. And it may be that we end up with a hybrid of those sorts of things. Students might have a hybrid of experiences during the school day, maybe half a day on remote learning and half a day attending, if we hit those sorts of that sort of crisis point with the lack of teachers.
What is the best way that Australia can go moving forward? Is it recruiting, say, as you mentioned, parents to come fill in the gaps? Is it home learning? Where do we see us going forward?
Well, we've actually been tolerating teacher shortages for quite some time. We've had national shortages now for more than 10 years in particular subject areas. I'm talking about maths and science, where it's, perennially difficult to recruit teachers in those areas. One of the problems is that we don't have adequate data monitoring teachers. Although various states and territories have some data, we don't have a national system. And of course, teachers do move across borders. We also need, I think, a broad national strategy about how we can attract, train and retain teachers. It's quite unusual internationally that Australia doesn't already have that strategy. I think such a strategy would need to have points of principle about how we value teachers. And I think a lot of that has been lacking in the last decade or so. In France, things have become so difficult, the teachers have all gone on strike. In Canada, they've had a range of new measures brought in and have changed their policies there so that our parents will not be notified of any cases within the school unless there's 30% absence from the school. If we look to the United States, which is probably a good comparison because they've also been suffering from teacher shortage even pre-pandemic, they've really struggled to fill classrooms and schools with teachers, and many states and school districts have returned to remote learning. Others, for example in Texas, have recruited parents as a stopgap measure.